The wind carries secrets over the bones of the earth. In the hush of twilight, as city lights flicker like ancient stars reborn, we begin our journey, not with monuments, but with absence. Not with the towering ruins of Egypt, or the columns of Greece, but with what is no longer there, no stone markers, no scrolls, no whispered names in the annals of time, just silence, thick, warm, and unnervingly deliberate. History as we know it is often a story told by what survived. But what of the stories never carved into stone? What of the voices never inked onto papyrus, never captured in the cold clasp of a coin? Beneath our feet, beyond the edges of maps, may lie entire civilizations whose timelines have crumbled, not with conquest or calamity, but with forgetting. Imagine a people who once sailed unknown seas, governed by stars now faded, who built, dreamed and wept just like us, who invented languages that fluttered into silence long before alphabets were born. Civilizations not swallowed in fire, but erased gently, grain by grain, by time's softest touch. Some of these may have been wiped out by floods, droughts, volcanic ash, or ice that blanketed their memory. Others were swallowed not by nature, but by their neighbors, conquered, overwritten, assimilated into invisibility. And then there are those for whom no trace was ever left, whose cities may have been wood, not stone, whose burial rites returned them completely to the soil, whose entire existence was biodegradable history. And so we ask, can a civilization truly vanish without a trace? We are conditioned to believe that greatness leaves monuments, that brilliance is etched into permanence, but perhaps the most advanced cultures understood impermanence, not as a weakness, but as a truth. Perhaps some chose to leave behind only memories that fade, like a footprint in a dream. As we lie here, in the comfort of now, drifting into the edges of sleep, we open our eyes to the veil that time has drawn. Behind it, beyond the reach of carbon dating and digital archives, dwell the ghost empires, nations without names, histories without maps, lives without echoes. And yet, something stirs. There are rumors, fragments, impossible artifacts out of time. There are stone tools beneath cities, spiral carvings in deserts where no human should have walked, submerged structures seen only by fish and satellites. There are whispered myths that sound too real, and real places that feel too mythical. This is where we begin, not in the ruins that proudly speak, but in the spaces that whisper, not with certainty, but with curiosity. Not to teach, but to wonder. For in the heart of the world's most enduring mysteries, we find a deeper comfort, that perhaps forgetting is not the end. Perhaps even without proof, the past remembers itself. And as your mind gently slips from the waking world, we invite you to follow us, to drift between what is known and what is only felt, as we explore. There is a river in northern Florida that winds like a serpent through limestone cliffs and shadowed forest, its waters as dark as forgotten ink. The Suwannee River, a name borrowed from the Muskogee phrase, Suwannee, meaning echoing earth. But if the river echoes, what exactly does it remember? Tonight, we drift alongside it, silent, slow, as if hoping the river might murmur the truth of what once was. Beneath its currents, and along its moss-covered banks, legends gather like mist. They speak of a people who lived in harmony with the flood cycles, who mapped the stars in spirals, who carved sacred paths between water and sky, a people now gone, not just from the land, but from time itself. They are not found in textbooks. No mighty capital bears their name. No royal lineage has survived in myth, but along the Suwannee, there are signs, subtle ones, earthen mounds, geometric ridges, and isolated stone circles, whose function no one quite agrees upon. These are not random arrangements of earth. They suggest purpose, design, civilization. The mounds in particular, some now overtaken by tree roots and wildflowers, are older than many of the more famous Mississippian earthworks. Some researchers believe they may predate even the earliest woodland cultures. If true, then we are looking not at forgotten people, but at a forgotten empire. And what is an empire, if not a society that knew how to organize, to govern, to preserve itself in the face of time? One doesn't build with such celestial alignment and mathematical regularity by accident. But here's the enigma: no writing, no recorded language, no burial chambers filled with artifacts of war or wealth, just earthen geometry, and the river's soft, ongoing sigh. Some oral traditions from the nearby Muskogee and Timucua tribes mention ancestral peoples who disappeared, who returned to the soil before the tribes themselves emerged. Could they be speaking of the Swanee people, a culture so attuned to the cycles of the earth that when their time ended, they did not fall, they dissolved? We are left with mysteries like the Swanee points, a type of fluted stone spearhead unique to the area. They appear suddenly in the archaeological record and vanish just as quickly, suggesting a burst of technological sophistication with no clear origin or legacy. It's as if someone lit a brilliant flame in the dark and then snuffed it out. Some theorists, reaching beyond conventional archaeology, suggest that the Swanee culture may have had migratory roots, connected perhaps to Caribbean sea travelers, or even ancient South American navigators. Others propose that they were the fragmented descendants of a much older pre-Ice Age civilization that found temporary refuge along the warm wetlands. What remains is this: there is no clear trail backward, and no surviving trace forward, just that flicker, those inexplicable sights, and the curious silence surrounding them. The modern world built over much of it. Logging companies erased thousands of acres, highway systems cut across ancient ceremonial paths, the swamps reclaimed what memory did not. It is entirely possible that a full civilization, with songs, rituals, and philosophies we'll never know, once thrived here, and then was forgotten, not because it collapsed, but because it left so little behind. And yet, the Swanee still flows. It curls around the land like a protective arm, keeping what little it knows beneath its surface, and if you sit by its edge in the soft blue hour before dawn, you might feel something, not a presence exactly, but a pause, a ripple in time, the kind that only comes when you're very close to something lost. This is the paradox of the Swanee Empire. It may have left no voice, and yet it still speaks, not in words, but in arrangements of stone, not in myths, but in mysteries, not in conquest, but in the quiet resilience of the land it once knew. As we move forward, deeper into this tapestry of hidden histories, we will find that the Swanee is not alone. Across the world, there are places just like it, whispers between centuries, begging us to listen more carefully. Next we cross seas, and climb cold altitudes, to a place where the stones speak more clearly, yet still no one understands them. We journey to the Andes, high in the windswept Andes, where clouds cling to the jagged stone like forgotten spirits. A mystery waits. Not in the temples of the Inca, well known and well documented, but beneath them, beneath the narrative we've been taught. Here, atop the high plains of Bolivia, lies Puma Punku, a site so precise, so inexplicable in its engineering, that it unsettles even the most seasoned archaeologists. Its name means, the door of the puma, but the doorway it guards is not to a temple, it's to a time that doesn't quite fit. Scattered across the plateau are immense stone blocks, some weighing over 100 tons, cut with laser-like precision, featuring interlocking channels, smooth 90-degree angles, and deep internal grooves. No one knows exactly how these blocks were moved, lifted, or shaped. The tools required are absent. The math, beyond the expected knowledge of those said to have lived here in 500 AD. And yet, they are here. Immovable, inexplicable, silent witnesses to a builder long gone. The Inca themselves claimed they did not build Puma Punku. They said it was made by the Viracocha, a legendary race of godlike beings, or perhaps ancestors, who came before. The Incas revered the site, but like us, could only wonder at its origin. Nearby, the ruins of Tiwanaku, once a vast city and cultural center, offer further clues. But even Tiwanaku, as magnificent as it was, appears to have inherited the foundations from something older. Radiocarbon dating offers conflicting timelines. Some estimates suggest Tiwanaku rose around 400 AD, while others hint that some structures at Pumapunku could be 2,000 years older, if not more. So, who were these precursor architects? If they existed, they left no texts, no graves, no art, only stone. Stone too perfect, too measured, too modern. This is where history begins to whisper, and myth starts to speak louder. Some scholars propose that what we see at Pumapunku is evidence of a forgotten culture that reached a peak of technological understanding, a knowledge later lost in war, disease, or natural disaster. Perhaps even a deliberate disappearance, a cultural decision to abandon stone and embrace impermanence. But others dare to think differently. They point to signs of cataclysm, a sudden drop in population, signs of flooding, evidence of seismic upheaval. Could an earthquake or astronomical shift have buried these civilizations in memory? Could something far older than the Inca have thrived here, only to vanish in a single generation? And still, the questions remain. Why are some of the stones magnetic? Why do they show signs of having been poured, not chiseled? Why do no Incan tools match the carvings? And why is there no myth about how they were made, only that they already were? We are trained to see history as a steady upward climb, from primitive to complex, from hunter to empire. But Pumapunku and its impossible craftsmanship challenges that narrative. It suggests that perhaps time is circular, that knowledge comes and goes in waves, that once before we were civilized, we were something else, something we no longer understand. There is a particular stillness in the Andes at night. The air is thin, the stars too close, and the silence almost sacred. It is in this space that the stones speak, not in language, but in questions. Who shaped us? Where did they go? And why did they leave without a name? The story of Pumapunku is not just about a lost civilization. It's about the limits of what we know, and our quiet refusal to accept that there may be whole chapters missing from the book of humanity. In many ways, it is the opposite of the Suwanese story. In Florida, the people disappeared and left almost nothing behind. Here in the Andes, they left something we can touch, but still cannot understand. From whispering rivers to frozen heights, the pattern continues. People who vanished not just from land, but from the timeline itself. Unwritten histories, sealed beneath lichen-covered stone. As we descend from the mountains, the mystery only deepens. We now journey eastward, across continents and centuries, to a place of dried riverbeds, undeciphered scripts, and buried cities. India's Sarasvati Sindhu civilization, and the silence of a language never read. There is a river that no longer flows, but once it sang across the plains of northwestern India. A lifeline for one of the oldest and least understood civilizations on Earth, the Sarasvati River. Though lost to sand and myth, it remains a haunting presence in Vedic hymns, described not merely as a river, but as a divine mother, a guide, a keeper of knowledge. And it is along her vanished banks that a vast, advanced, yet still nameless civilization once thrived. Most know of the Indus Valley civilization, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, cities of brick and grid, of sanitation and order. But beyond these, farther east toward the ancient Sarasvati's former path, archaeologists have uncovered hundreds of other sites, even larger, even older, hidden beneath desert and farmland. Together, they form what some now call the Sarasvati Sindhu civilization, potentially the largest urban culture of the ancient world. Yet, despite its scale, its sophistication, its deep connection to water, stars, and symmetry, this civilization left us no readable voice. Their script, etched on steatite seals and painted on pottery, remains undeciphered to this day. Tiny marks, loops, animal motifs, and humanoid symbols, a language frozen in time. Do they tell of gods, of trade, of loss? We may never know. Unlike Sumerian cuneiform or Egyptian hieroglyphs, the Sarasvati script has no bilingual key, no Rosetta Stone, only fragments, only whispers. And still, the cities themselves speak. They reveal extraordinary urban planning, straight roads, sophisticated drainage systems, centralized granaries, standardized weights and measures, all of this over 4,500 years ago. Long before the rise of Egypt's pyramids, before Babylon, before Athens, these were not primitive villages, these were engineers, astronomers, artists. Yet, unlike the civilizations that came later, they built without ostentation, no towering monuments, no golden temples, just functionality, resilience, and a mysterious humility. Why? Some scholars suggest their spiritual philosophy may have centered around non-permanence, a reverence for balance over conquest. Others propose that this was a non-hierarchical society, where central kingship was absent, and status was measured not in wealth, but in contribution. If so, they were not only ahead in engineering, but also in social imagination. Then came the decline. Around 1900 BCE, something changed. The river systems shifted, climate patterns altered. The once fertile Sarasvati began to dry. With it, cities were abandoned, trade collapsed, the people scattered. But there are no signs of war, no burned cities, no mass graves, no epic disaster, just disappearance. A soft fading, like a candle allowed to burn down in silence. And here, the story takes on a spiritual hue. Many Vedic scholars believe that the Rig Veda, the oldest sacred text of India, was composed by the descendants of these people. In it, the Sarasvati River is praised more than any other. Could this be memory? Could it be the echo of a lost homeland, sung into mythology so it would never fully vanish? The connection is debated. Traditional archaeologists remain cautious, but increasingly, evidence points toward continuity, not collapse. That the Harappans and Sarasvati peoples did not vanish, but slowly merged into later cultures, their identity diluted, but not destroyed. Still, their silence is profound. We cannot read their words, we cannot speak their language, we can only walk their streets, gaze at their water tanks, and feel the invisible weight of all that went unspoken. What makes this loss so haunting is how present they still feel. Their bricks still fit perfectly, their seals still bear fingerprints, their wells still hold traces of water, yet, they are anonymous shadows, cast by a river that no longer flows. What kind of world did they dream of? What wisdom did they carry, only to bury in a script no one reads? Perhaps their story warns us that greatness without legacy becomes mystery. Or perhaps it comforts us, suggesting that meaning does not always need memory, that some civilizations live on in the rhythm of the land, in the spiritual undercurrents of future people, long after their names have dissolved. As the night deepens, and your breath begins to sink with the slow tide of time, we drift forward from India's deserts to another kind of vanishing, not beneath the soil or sands, but beneath the sea. For some cities are not buried in dust, but in water. Next we follow the myths of Arabia, and the ancient city said to have been swallowed by the desert and erased by divine will. In the emptiest part of the Arabian Peninsula lies a sea without water, the Rub al-Khali, or the empty quarter. A desert so vast, so silent, that even the wind seems hesitant to speak. But beneath its golden dunes, legend says, sleeps a city once so magnificent, so decadent, that the heavens themselves conspired to bury it. This is the story of Ubba, sometimes called Aram of the Pillars, other times the Atlantis of the Sands, a name whispered in ancient texts, spoken of in the Quran as a city of splendor and sin. A city whose people, the tribe of Ad, was said to have grown arrogant and defiant. They built tall towers, traded fine wares, and carved their homes from stone and pride. When they turned from divine wisdom, the story goes, a great wind raged for 7 nights and 8 days, and the city vanished beneath the sands, punished by the heavens. For centuries, scholars debated whether Uber ever truly existed, or whether it was simply a myth, an echo from a time when stories were more powerful than maps. But then, in the late 20th century, technology met legend. Using satellite imagery from NASA, archaeologists identified long-lost caravan routes, ancient trade roads, once used to transport frankincense, the lifeblood of Arabian commerce. These routes converged at a single point in southern Oman, and there, beneath the dust, a collapsed limestone sinkhole revealed what looked like an underground fortress, ringed by towers, as described in lore. The site was called Shissa. Was this Uber? Excavations unearthed pottery, trade goods, and remnants of walls. Evidence suggested it was indeed a wealthy trading hub, a crossroads of desert commerce. But just as quickly as hope rose, certainty faded. Some scholars argued that Shissa was simply one of many fortified outposts. Others questioned whether a single city could have commanded enough presence to warrant the myths. Still, there was something uncanny about the precision of the discovery. The trade routes matched medieval Islamic maps, the location aligned with Bedouin legends passed through generations, and the sinkhole collapse. Was it a geological fluke, or a memory of the city's divine destruction? The mystery deepened. Could Uber have been more than one place, a name given to an entire culture, a metaphor for pre-Islamic pride, projected onto any oasis city that had risen too high? Or was it a real, physical capital, now fragmented, forgotten, and deliberately removed from history? Satellite scans suggest that beneath the sands of Oman and Saudi Arabia lie the ghost veins of lost rivers, dry wadis, that once fed vibrant settlements. Climate records reveal that the empty quarter was not always so empty. Millennia ago, it hosted grasslands, lakes, and rain-fed agriculture. It is entirely possible that an empire, large or small, flourished here, only to fall to drought and shifting monsoons. And with it, its memory collapsed, slowly buried beneath centuries of shifting dunes. Unlike the Sarasvati Sindhu people, or the builders of Puma Punku, the people of Uber may have been erased, not by forgetfulness, but by narrative, by the reshaping of history into morality. Their fall wasn't just recorded, it was explained as punishment, but morality tales often swallow nuance, and what's left is myth, glittering, dramatic, and emotionally satisfying, but historically ambiguous. So which version is true? Was Uber a lesson, a place, or both? Today, the wind still scours the ruins at Shissa. Tourists come. Some feel awe, some feel nothing, but if you stand still enough, if you listen to the sand slip past stone, you might hear the echo of a market, the whisper of camels, the rustle of silks. You might feel the pressure of buried time wanting to rise, but not quite ready. For Uber is not entirely lost, it exists in fragments, clay shards, trade routes, oral traditions, and perhaps that is all a legend needs to endure, not certainty, but presence. The lingering possibility that something real once stood where now there is only heat and silence. As the stars rise over the desert and your breathing slows, we leave Uber behind, its towers imagined, its roads buried, its fate still unsolved. Our next journey takes us to a colder place, where not sand, but ice, has hidden the past. The Arctic is a place of stillness, where silence has texture and time appears frozen, not just in ice, but in memory. Yet even here, in a landscape seemingly untouched by human ambition, there are rumors, not of polar bears or explorers, but of people, of cultures before the Inuit, before the sea swallowed the land, before history had words. As the aurora shimmers faintly in the black polar sky, we drift into one of the world's least discussed mysteries. Were there civilizations in the Arctic, long before any record of them could be kept? Some believe there were. And if they existed, they are now buried beneath glaciers, beneath permafrost, beneath oceans risen from melted millennia. Among the Inuit and Yupik peoples, There are legends of the Chunita people, stronger than modern humans, able to lift boulders and survive where few could. They came from the north, some say, and built stone houses along the ice, but they vanished before the modern Arctic tribes arrived, leaving behind curious ruins, stone tools, and deep silence. Archaeologists have uncovered sites in Greenland, Canada's Arctic archipelago, and Siberia that do not fit known timelines. Some stone alignments appear astronomical in purpose, others suggest seasonal dwelling cycles too consistent to be coincidence. But the evidence is fragmentary, hints, not confirmations. Could there have been an Arctic culture, perhaps not an empire, but a maritime civilization, that flourished during an earlier warm period? The Earth has shifted many times. Between glacial advances and retreats, the Arctic may have once been more hospitable, lush even. In those intervals, coastal peoples could have navigated along now submerged land bridges. They may have fished, traded, and mapped the skies in ways we have yet to rediscover. But the ice took them, not with fire, not with war, but with slow, indifferent cold. Entire coastlines now lie beneath icy shelves. Organic material decays quickly in Arctic conditions, and shifting permafrost destroys more than it preserves. What remains are scattered tools, odd bone structures, and stories etched into oral tradition, like faint footprints in the snow. Science has only just begun to ask the right questions. Recent discoveries of preserved hunting camps beneath glacial melt zones have stunned researchers. A bone needle here, a carved ivory object there. Nothing to suggest grandeur, but enough to suggest presence. It is the contrast that keeps us awake, an empty world that wasn't always empty. Imagine a culture that never used metal, never built in stone, never raised monuments, but survived by memory, by song, by seasonal movement, across a land now erased. Their temples were sky and snow, their libraries were the stars. Their wisdom, if it remains, is locked in a frozen language we have not yet thawed, and perhaps it is not meant to be. Perhaps some civilizations are meant to drift into myth, carried by wind and ice into dreams. As your breath slows with the rhythm of Arctic wind, we move again, this time beneath the ocean surface. For not all lost empires are hidden in frost or sand. Some lie waiting in the deepest blue, carved from stone, yet drowned in silence. Next we submerge into the mystery of the Yonaguni Monument, Japan's underwater enigma. Beneath the waves off the southern coast of Japan, there is a shadow, massive, angular, unmoving. It rests at the edge of the East China Sea, near Yonaguni Island, the last of Japan's southwestern archipelago, before the waters slip toward Taiwan. Divers who descend into these waters often describe the moment not as discovery, but as confrontation with something impossible. For there, rising from the seabed, like the hushed bones of an ancient temple, is a monolithic structure of perfect geometry, right angles, staircases, terraces, and what appears to be a carved platform, a silent ziggurat of stone beneath the sea. Some call it the Yonaguni Monument. Others, more cautiously, call it a formation. But the question lingers, like salt in the lungs: was it built or born? The structure was first brought to public attention in the 1980s, when local diver Kiichiro Arataki stumbled upon the site. What he saw sent ripples across the archaeological community: blocks of sandstone that looked cut, not fractured, features resembling steps, columns, ramps, and what some interpret as a throne. To some, it resembled the ruins of a sunken city. Theories bloomed. Could it be the remnant of a prehistoric Japanese civilization, one that predated written history? Some suggested it might be over 10,000 years old, which would place it well before the end of the last ice age, a time when sea levels were drastically lower and land masses broader. Could it have been a ceremonial center for a people now erased by the rising ocean, a sanctuary, swallowed slowly, year by year, as the glaciers melted and coastlines drowned? Or was it a natural formation, shaped by tectonic shearing, eroded by waves into uncanny precision. Science remains divided. Geologists point to stratified sandstone and tectonic activity as likely causes of the monument's eerie shapes. Nature, after all, is capable of incredible mimicry. Erosion can imitate design, cracks can simulate cuts, water has a patient hand. But other scholars disagree. They highlight what appears to be tool marks on certain surfaces, symmetrical walls that extend at right angles, a series of megalithic steps that rise in consistent intervals, too measured to be random. And around the monument, there are stone circles, pillars, and large stones that resemble guardians or markers. There is also carved relief nearby, what some believe to be an ancient animal or mythical figure, etched faintly into the rock. And further up the island, artifacts have been found from ancient human settlements that date back thousands of years, suggesting a cultural presence in the area long before the sea rose. The truth remains elusive. Even if it is natural, it was discovered, and now interpreted, through the lens of myth. The Riku people, who have lived in these islands for centuries, speak of a lost land beneath the sea. Some connect it to the mythical kingdom of Mer, a fabled Pacific Atlantis spoken of in speculative circles. While such tales remain unproven, their emotional gravity endures. For what is Yonaguni, if not proof that we don't know everything? Its presence beneath the ocean offers a haunting possibility that we are not finished unearthing our past, and that much of it may lie where we no longer dare to look beneath the waves. Satellite images have shown submerged patterns off other coasts from Cuba, India, Greece, to the Doggerland plains beneath the North Sea, patterns that hint at roads, walls, entire villages once above water. In this light, Yonaguni may be the visible tip of a submerged archive, a library of erased beginnings. Perhaps we will never know who carved it, if anyone did. Perhaps it is both, a natural foundation enhanced by human hands, revered and then lost as the sea reclaimed its claim. But even as speculation persists, the monument does something few ruins do. It lives in motion. Every dive reveals a new angle, every current reshapes its silt, every passing fish becomes a keeper of its secret. And as we float, suspended in salt and time, there is a dream-like calm that overtakes us, a surrender to not knowing. That may be the greatest gift of Yonaguni, not answers, but a humbling mystery that slows the mind, softens the breath, and invites us deeper into sleep. We surface gently now, not into light, but into language, or more accurately, the lack of it. For our next journey takes us to a land famous for its statues, but home to a silence far deeper, a silence written in wood, never read. Far across the South Pacific, over thousands of miles of open water, lies a speck of volcanic earth, called Rapa Nui, known to the world as Easter Island. It is a place of paradoxes, infamous for its colossal moai statues, the solemn stone faces that watch the sea, yet almost nothing is known of the people who raised them. Their tools are missing, their stories are fractured, their timeline uncertain. But of all the mysteries wrapped in this island's long shadow, one is the most haunting, a written language that no one can read, a script that survives, but refuses to speak. It is called Rongorongo, carved in flowing lines across wooden tablets. The script is made up of strange glyphs, curling figures of birds, humans, crescents, fish, and geometric shapes. Some face forward, others are flipped upside down. They are written in a unique method called reverse bostrapheden, meaning the lines alternate direction, snaking back and forth like a plowed field. Only about 24 Rongorongo texts remain. All of them were discovered after European contact, long after much of the island's cultural continuity had been shattered by disease, colonization, and slave raids. And even then the islanders could no longer read them. The knowledge had been lost. When asked, elders said the glyphs were sacred, forbidden, powerful, but none could translate them. It was as if a great forgetting had occurred, sudden, total, and irreversible. How does a society forget its own script? Some believe the fall came quickly, perhaps due to resource collapse, internal strife, or introduced illness. Others think the literate, priestly class may have been wiped out or silenced during a period of upheaval. Whatever the reason, the knowledge of Rongorongo faded, leaving only symbols without sound. Scholars have tried for decades to decode it. Some believe it is a mnemonic device used for chants, genealogies, or ritual calendars. Others think it may contain astronomical records or farming instructions. A few even propose it was not a true script, but a symbolic system used for ceremonial purposes. There are patterns repeating sequences, glyph clusters at the start and end of tablets that suggest grammar structure. But there is no Rosetta Stone, no bilingual guide, no way to align the symbols with known languages, and attempts to decode it, using Polynesian linguistic roots, have proven inconclusive. There is also this unsettling detail. Some of the glyphs appear almost too uniform, as if copied repeatedly without full understanding. Could Rongorongo have already been decaying before contact? Could scribes have been preserving a form without meaning, writing symbols they no longer understood, simply because they were sacred? If so, then Rongorongo is not just a lost language, it is a memory of a memory, fading into abstraction even before it was interrupted. And yet, the weight of it remains. To hold one of the surviving tablets, kept now in museums in Santiago, Honolulu, and St. Petersburg, is to touch something profoundly intimate. A private voice carved into driftwood and bark, meant to last, the smooth ridges where fingers once ran. The labor of hands that believed meaning was eternal, but meaning was not. All that remains is form without voice, structure without story. In this, Rongorongo becomes something deeper than an undeciphered script. It becomes a metaphor for every civilization we've forgotten. A symbol of how fragile memory is, not because of war or destruction, but because of silence. The Moa's statues may be more famous, but it is Rongorongo that stares back at us more quietly. It reminds us that not all loss is visible. Some losses are linguistic, symbolic, internal, the kind of erasure that leaves no scars, only stillness. What truths did it carry? What myths, what warnings? We may never know, but we are listening now, and sometimes listening is enough to reawaken the echo of a voice long buried. As sleep begins to weigh on your eyelids, we leave the island behind. The waves roll gently once more. The symbols fade from vision, the mystery remains. And now we head inland, to the world's largest desert, a place where rivers once flowed, cities may have bloomed, and sand now buries every trace of breath and brick. The Sahara today is a world of silence and shimmer, an endless sea of golden dunes, heat mirages, and barren stone plains stretch across 8 million square kilometers, a third of Africa. But it was not always so. Once, long before the pharaohs, long before writing or wheels, the Sahara was not a desert, but a savanna, a land of green, rain, rivers and people. This is the forgotten world of the Green Sahara, and possibly the traces of a lost desert civilization, one that bloomed when the Earth's axis tilted just slightly differently, and monsoon rains breathed life into what is now one of the harshest places on the planet. This was not a trickle of moisture. It was a transformation. From about 10,000 to 5,000 years ago, the Sahara was dotted with lakes, forests, and wildlife. Elephants roamed, crocodiles lounged in freshwater pools, herds of cattle grazed under acacia trees, and the people, yes, there were people, painted their lives into the walls of caves. The most haunting of these artworks can be found in Tassili and Adja, a plateau in southeastern Algeria. Across thousands of rock faces are murals depicting hunters, dancers, gods, and beasts. Some are simple, others are astonishingly detailed, and among them are images that seem to show rituals, agriculture, and even strange non-human figures, enigmatic enough to spark whispers of visitors from the stars. But whether spiritual or literal, the art reveals something essential. This was not a place on the edge of survival. This was a culture vibrant and expressive, perhaps even organized. Satellite imagery has deepened the mystery. In recent decades, scientists have uncovered vast ancient riverbeds hidden beneath sand. The most striking is the so-called Tamanrasset River, a prehistoric waterway as large as the Nile, flowing from the Atlas Mountains deep into what is now desert. Along these buried rivers are signs of settlement, possible walls, mound structures, and geometric anomalies, too regular to be accidental. Some speculate this could be evidence of a lost desert empire, one that thrived on trade, cattle domestication, and perhaps early spiritual structures, long before Mesopotamia or Egypt rose. But if they existed, where did they go? As the Earth's orbit slowly shifted again, the monsoons withdrew, the sky dried, the lakes shrank to puddles, rivers turned to dust. The people followed the retreating rains, some migrating to the Nile Valley, others perhaps fading into oral tradition and dust. No written records exist, no grand temples, no kings etched into stone, just fragments, tools, pottery, cave art, and a silence deeper than sand. Some propose a more elaborate theory, that the roots of Egyptian culture began here, born of desert sages and migrants who brought their knowledge downstream as the climate collapsed. The astronomical alignments found in some Saharan carvings may even prefigure Egypt's later skyward obsessions. Others believe the Sahara was home to many miniature civilizations, unconnected by empire, but linked by climate and survival. A web of lost villages, sacred sites, and sun-based calendars, all erased not by war but by weather. And there is still more to uncover, because the Sahara is not done revealing itself. In Mauritania, the Richat structure, or the Eye of the Sahara, has fascinated both scientists and mystery seekers, a massive circular formation, almost too perfect, visible from space. While geologists say it is a natural dome of eroded rock, others speculate it was the location of Atlantis or a ceremonial city washed away by ancient flood. True or not, the sheer unexplored vastness of the Sahara keeps the door open. Buried deep beneath dunes may be temples, maps, or entire cities, waiting for the wind to move just right. The idea of a civilization built on grass, erased by sand, is one of the most delicate losses in human memory. There are no dramatic collapses, no epic battles, just the gradual suffocation of a culture by time and thirst. Can we call it lost if no one remembers it ever existed? Or do the rocks remember for us? As you drift deeper into rest, let the thought settle softly. Not all great things shout. Some bloom quietly, leave no trace, and trust that someone, someday, will notice the space they once filled. From the sand we return now to stone. But not just any stone. Stone so old it predates agriculture, so strange it rewrites everything we thought we knew about when and how civilization began. Next we travel to Göbekli Tepe, and the silent neighbors who may have built the world twice. On a windswept hill in southeastern Turkey, far from any modern city, lie stones that should not exist. Their carvings are precise, their arrangement deliberate, their size monumental. They rise in perfect circles, pillars of limestone, etched with animals, abstract symbols, and mysteries, so old they predate the written word. This is Göbekli Tepe, the oldest known megalithic site on Earth, older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, older even than the invention of the wheel or formal agriculture, by thousands of years. Carbon dating places Göbekli Tepe at around 9600 BCE, a time when, according to traditional archaeology, humans were nomadic hunter-gatherers, concerned with survival, not ceremony. And yet here they were, lifting 20-ton pillars, carving precise iconography, and arranging them in circles that suggest cosmology and ritual purpose. How? How did a people without cities, without metal tools, without supposed civilization, create a structure so complex, so intentional? And more haunting still, why did they bury it? Sometime after its construction, Göbekli Tepe was intentionally covered, entombed beneath layers of earth, as if its creators wanted to hide it from others, from the future, or from themselves. But Göbekli Tepe may only be the beginning. In the last 2 decades, ground-penetrating radar and satellite surveys have revealed dozens of similar sites nearby, still buried. Hills that are not hills, but temples cloaked in time. Sites like Karahan Tepe, Sayburç, and others across the Şanlıurfa region suggest that Göbekli Tepe was part of a much larger network of ceremonial structures. An entire civilization may have existed here, without cities, without writing, without war, and yet capable of organizing labor, geometry, mythology, and time itself. Who were they? They left no texts, no graves with names, no direct descendants we can trace. But their work was not random. The iconography, carved into the pillars, foxes, boars, birds, serpents, repeats across sites. There is a visual language at play, a symbolic system, whose meaning has been lost. Some researchers believe these carvings encode astronomical knowledge, maps of the stars, perhaps even comet impacts, or seasonal markers. Others see them as totemic, linked to shamanic practices and fertility rituals. But everyone agrees on one thing: Göbekli Tepe was built by people who thought deeply about the cosmos. And that changes everything. Because if spirituality, ceremony, and symbolic thinking came before agriculture, then our understanding of human development is reversed. It was not farming that led to temples. It may have been temples that led to farming. The desire to settle near sacred places, to gather regularly, may have sparked the first steps towards civilization, and yet this earliest culture left no monuments to ego, no kings, no warriors, no inscriptions of conquest, just circles, circles of stone and silence. Some theorists whisper more radical ideas, that this region may be the echo of a far older civilization, one that survived a cataclysm, perhaps the end of the last ice age, and sought to encode its memory in sacred geometry and stone. They point to the Younger Dryas event, a sudden global cooling around 10,800 BCE, possibly triggered by a comet strike or massive meltwater pulse, a disaster that could have erased earlier cultures, forcing survivors to start again, to pass down knowledge in symbol, not script. Whether this is speculative or not, the effect of Göbekli Tepe remains the same. It reshapes the story of humanity. It tells us that humans long ago were not simple. They were seekers, builders, philosophers with no books, engineers with no wheels, artists with no signatures, and they may not have been alone. Because for a civilization to produce something as enduring as Göbekli Tepe, it requires context, a network, a culture, perhaps even neighbors who shared in its vision, or competed in sacred artistry. Those neighbors are now missing, vanished into the folds of soil and time, their names unspoken, their ideas unrecorded. But the implication is clear: there was a world before our world, and it thought deeply, and it worshipped, and then it was gone. As we leave the stone circles, and descend back into the soft quiet of night, we carry with us a question: what happens when memory outlives language? From Turkey's sacred plateau, we now journey south, across deserts and Nile waters, to a kingdom that once rivaled Egypt, but is now overshadowed by it, a civilization that stood tall, but left behind only whispers of its greatness. When we think of pyramids, we think of Egypt, of golden masks, dynastic tombs, and towering monuments beneath the desert sun. But south of Egypt, along the winding curve of the Nile, there once stood another kingdom, one older than memory, and just as magnificent. A kingdom whose pyramids still stand, though lesser known. A kingdom of black pharaohs, rulers of Nubia, now almost forgotten by mainstream history. This was the kingdom of Kush. Its heart lay in Nubia, an ancient region, stretching from southern Egypt into modern Sudan. For centuries, the Kushites lived in parallel to the Egyptians, sometimes rivals, sometimes allies, always independent. And at times they were more than equal. In the 8th century BCE, one Kushite king, Piye, crossed into Egypt and began a campaign that would forever alter the Nile Valley. He conquered Upper and Lower Egypt, and established the 25th dynasty, a line of black pharaohs who ruled as gods on earth from both Napata and Thebes. These were not foreign invaders, they were deeply spiritual, learned, and respectful of Egyptian tradition. In fact, they sought not to destroy Egyptian culture, but to revive it, restoring old temples, reintroducing forgotten rituals, and embodying a sacred kingship that even Egyptian dynasties had let fade. Their reign was marked by strength, piety, and architectural ambition, yet their legacy was quietly erased. Why? Part of it was geopolitics. The Assyrians eventually pushed the Kushites back into Nubia, and later Egyptian rulers, embarrassed perhaps by a dynasty of outsiders, minimized their memory. The Greeks and Romans that followed treated Nubia as peripheral, exotic, other, and over centuries, Western historians continued this dismissal, often ignoring the African heart of Kush in favor of Egypt's sandstone grandeur, but Kush endured. Even after their rule over Egypt ended, the Nubians built a thriving civilization, one of ironworks, trade, astronomy, and royal power, at Meroe, further south. Their pyramids, smaller but steeper than those of Giza, dot the desert still, over 200 of them scattered like sacred stars, many yet unexcavated. Unlike Egypt, Meroitic tombs contain no elaborate sarcophagi. The hieroglyphic system they used, the Meroitic script, remains largely undeciphered. We know fragments of their history through Greek and Roman reports, through temple inscriptions, and through the silent majesty of their ruins. But the voices of the Nubians themselves have largely vanished, and that silence carries weight. What would their songs have sounded like? What philosophies did they pass from ruler to ruler? What stories of pride, of pain, of power, have been lost beneath layers of windblown sand? Even now, in museums across the world, artifacts of Nubia are often displayed as footnotes to Egyptian history, an addendum, not a centerpiece. The Black Pharaohs are rarely included in textbooks. Their greatness, their contribution, still waits to be reclaimed. But the earth remembers. The pyramids at El Kuru and Nuri still rise against the sky. The temple of Amun at Jebel Barkal still bears inscriptions praising kings with names like Taharka, Shabaka, and Tanutamun, men who ruled from the south and carried divine authority across nations. Some historians argue that Kush was not simply a shadow of Egypt, but a distinct and powerful civilization in its own right, one with its own gods, its own artistic voice, and a political structure rooted in both spirituality and matrilineal inheritance. In Kush, Queens Kandakes were warriors and rulers, etched into legend with spears in hand and crowns on their brows. In this too, the Nubians stood apart. And yet, they were forgotten, not because they vanished without a trace, but because the trace was neglected, the record was overwritten. The narrative shaped by those who followed. This is not the loss of memory by time, but by choice, a historical silence imposed. But tonight, as we walk the sands of Nubia under a sky swollen with stars, we remember them differently. Not as Egypt's echo, but as a flame of its own, brief, brilliant, and unjustly dimmed. And perhaps that is the deeper truth of the Black Pharaohs, that power does not guarantee legacy, that even gods can be forgotten if no one tends their name. We carry it now gently into the next story, for not all lost civilizations were erased by the elements, some were dismantled systematically. Next we enter the Carpathian Mountains, where walls once rose like teeth, and the Dacian Empire resisted Rome until it disappeared from history. In the wild, forested heart of Eastern Europe, where mists hang over mountains and pine roots twist around stone, there once stood a civilization of warriors and dreamers, a people known for their fortresses carved into cliffs, their golden myths, and their bitter resistance to one of the greatest empires in history. They were the Dacians, and today, most of the world barely knows their name. Between the Carpathians and the Danube River, in what is now modern-day Romania, the Dacians thrived. They were not a wandering tribe, but a kingdom complete with cities, religion, and artistry. Their capital, Sarmizegetusa Regia, perched in the Orishiti Mountains, was both a military stronghold and a sacred site where astronomy and ritual aligned. Their temples were circular, mimicking celestial patterns. Their altars echoed the cycles of the sun and moon. Their fortresses, 6 of which are now UNESCO World Heritage Sites, were feats of strategic engineering, blending seamlessly into mountain ridges, as if grown from the land itself. The Dacians were not primitive, they were organized, spiritual, and fiercely independent. They worked gold into spirals and serpents. They used iron tools, and they built in stone, at a time when many around them still built in wood. But Rome came for them anyway. Under Emperor Trajan, the Roman Empire launched a full-scale invasion of Dacia in 101 CE. It was not simply conquest, it was a campaign of destruction and absorption. The Dacians fought with everything they had, led by their king, Disbalus, whose name still echoes in Romanian legend. But Rome was relentless. Trajan's Dacian wars were immortalized in one of the empire's grandest monuments, Trajan's Column in Rome, a towering scroll of sculpted propaganda. It depicts the Dacians as noble and fierce, and ultimately crushed. The scenes are elegant, dramatic, and utterly one-sided. Nowhere is Disbalus's voice heard. Nowhere do we learn what the Dacians fought for, what they believed, what they mourned. The Romans won, and with victory came erasure. They destroyed the Dacian temples, they salted the earth, they tore down symbols of resistance, and built Roman cities atop sacred sites. They imported Roman settlers, Latin language, and new gods. Over time, Dacian identity was absorbed, diluted, rewritten. It was not obliteration, it was assimilation by design. Few written records remain. The Dacians themselves kept no written histories. What we know of them comes through the eyes of their conquerors. Fragments from Pliny Dio Cassius, and others, who viewed them through Roman prejudice. This is the tragedy of the Dacians, that their end was documented, but their life was not. The ruins at Sarmizegetusa still stand. Weathered stones form sacred circles, hidden beneath moss and snowfall. Nearby villages speak of strange energies in the forest, of sacred geometry, of whispers in the mist. Folk songs tell of a people who never fully died, who hid their soul in the mountains. Modern researchers have found Dacian tools, weapons, jewelry, and ritual sites that speak of a rich, complex culture, one that deserves more than a footnote in the margins of Roman glory. And still, there are questions. Were the Dacians connected to older Indo-European priesthoods? Did their sacred calendar encode astronomical events? Did they possess philosophical or spiritual knowledge lost in the fire of conquest? We may never know, because what is not preserved is often presumed to be unimportant. But the mountains remember. They hold the shapes of temples worn by centuries. They cradle the gold veins the Dacians once revered. They echo softly with stories that Rome could not completely silence. Tonight we pause here, on the edge of forest and ruin, and listen, not to history books, but to the wind, to what remains when the victors forget to finish the erasure. From these burned-out fortresses and hidden altars, we move now toward a decay of a different kind, not one caused by war, but by nature itself, a city not conquered, but reclaimed, breath by breath, by jungle and time. Next we descend into the canopy-covered mystery of El Mirador, the great Maya city that quietly vanished. Deep in the humid heart of the Guatemalan rainforest, hidden beneath thick canopies and tangled vines, sleeps a city so vast, so ancient, it was once called the cradle of Maya civilization, yet few today even know its name. El Mirador, long before Tikal, before Chichen Itza, before Palenque and Copan, there was El Mirador, a metropolis that rose in grandeur 1,000 years before the classical Maya era, and then it vanished. Not in a blaze of conquest, not in fire or flood, but in the quiet, slow suffocation of collapse, a disappearance so subtle it left the great city to the trees. The rise of a forgotten giant, El Mirador, flourished during the pre-classic period, between 600 BCE and 100 CE. At its height it was home to hundreds of thousands of people and spanned more than 50 square kilometers, far larger than later Maya cities. Its pyramids were colossal. The Ladanta Pyramid Complex remains one of the largest pyramids by volume in the world, dwarfing even Egypt's Great Pyramid if measured by mass. Built with raw manpower and stone, layer by layer, it reaches over 70 meters 230 feet high, its summit emerging above the jungle canopy like an island in a green sea. Beneath Ladanta, sprawling causeways, Sakbiob, connected the city to surrounding settlements. These roads, some as wide as highways, were elevated and whitewashed to reflect moonlight, enabling nighttime travel between cities. El Mirador was not a village that became a city. It was a civilization, planned, connected, and guided by cosmology and kingship. The silence after, and yet by the 2nd century CE, this thriving culture collapsed. The pyramids were abandoned. The roads faded beneath moss. The stone temples, once painted red and adorned with carvings, were swallowed by vines. By the time later Maya civilizations rose, El Mirador was already a myth, its memory fragmented or forgotten. Why? There are no signs of war or mass famine. The collapse appears to have been gradual, not catastrophic. Most researchers believe the fall of El Mirador was ecological. Its builders had deforested vast swathes of jungle to produce lime for plaster, which they used to coat their buildings. This large-scale burning altered the soil, disrupted agriculture, and eroded the fragile balance between society and its environment. In short, the very brilliance of their architecture, the beauty that made them great, became their undoing. Others suggest political fragmentation and a breakdown in centralized power. Still others believe the long dry seasons may have intensified, leading to crop failure and outmigration. Whatever the cause, the people left, and the forest moved in. Rediscovery in the modern age. For centuries, El Mirador lay buried beneath the green. It wasn't until the 20th century that archaeologists, guided by aerial photography and satellite data, realized the scale of what was hidden. Even now, most of the site remains unexcavated. Researchers work in extreme isolation, days from the nearest road, dependent on helicopters and mules. The jungle has reclaimed its claim. What has been uncovered, however, is astonishing. Not just size and complexity, but evidence of sophisticated ideology, ritual life, astronomical alignments, and water management. Relief carvings suggest a belief system rich in mythic cosmology. Some stairways align with solstices. Reservoirs and canals reflect environmental adaptation. El Mirador challenges the notion that early Mesoamerican societies were primitive until the Classic era. Instead, it tells us that a golden age came early and then was forgotten. A city that faded, not fell. Unlike Pompeii or Troy, there was no dramatic end. El Mirador did not die in fire. It did not fall to an invader. It simply faded. People moved on. Trees took root in abandoned plazas. Rain softened the edges of pyramids. Insects swarmed. Roots cracked limestone. And the city, majestic and immense, became invisible. This kind of disappearance is the most haunting. Not destruction, but absorption. What remains of El Mirador is not just its architecture, but its absence. A void where greatness once stood. A ghost city that speaks in volume, but not in voice. And it asks us, how many other civilizations like this exist, swallowed not by flame or sword, but by forgetting? As you lay back into the quiet, consider the possibility that there are dozens, maybe hundreds of cities just like El Mirador, sleeping beneath trees, under lakes, behind cliffs, waiting for the right question to be asked, or the right layer of soil to lift. From the jungle's hush, we return now to the world of the living, the modern world. But what if parts of that ancient world are still beneath us? In our final transition, we explore the strange truth that many great civilizations may lie buried directly under the cities we inhabit today. Beneath the concrete, beneath the traffic, beneath the steel bones of modern life, older cities sleep. Whole civilizations paved over by time, layer upon layer, like a palimpsest of forgotten dreams. In Istanbul, once Byzantium, then Constantinople, then capital of the Ottoman Empire, construction workers frequently strike walls, roads, and cisterns that date back millennia. Beneath modern streets, archaeologists have uncovered Neolithic settlements, Roman aqueducts, and the lost harbor of Theodosius, complete with shipwrecks from the 4th century. In Athens, subways run beside ancient tombs, train stations display recovered statues and tools behind glass. In Rome, the ruins are not beneath the city, they are the city. Restaurants sit atop foundations from the Republic era, churches rest upon pagan temples, and every time a new foundation is dug, someone finds a whisper from 2,000 years ago. In Cairo, the living sprawl has overtaken tombs. In Jerusalem, every excavation is a doorway to another era. In Mexico City, the Spanish colonial grid was built directly atop the temples of the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan. Beneath cathedrals and cobblestones lie the bones of gods and kings. This is not a metaphor. This is geology with memory. We do not merely build over history, we stand on it. The stratigraphy of civilization. Archaeologists speak of strata, distinct layers of soil and stone, that contain evidence of past human presence. Sometimes the layers are thick with debris, pottery, tools, burned seeds. Sometimes they're heartbreakingly thin, the ash of a single fire, the outline of a dwelling long since collapsed, and sometimes there is an entire city underneath. In Amarna, Urarog, Knossos, and countless others, ancient cities were buried by conquest, flood, or abandonment, only to be replaced by new ones, forgotten until rediscovered by accident or tragedy. The reasons vary. Some cities were deliberately entombed, their memory too painful or too sacred to leave exposed. Others were lost to earthquakes, rivers changing course, or the slow sediment of time. Some were simply built over, their inhabitants too focused on the future to preserve the past. And then, of course, there's the strange idea that perhaps some of these older layers were never meant to be remembered, that forgetting is part of civilization's rhythm, that we bury the old not just physically, but culturally, emotionally, mythologically. What does it mean to live atop a city you no longer know, to drink from aquifers carved by forgotten hands, to light your home over the hearth of someone who lived 4,000 years ago? There's something hauntingly intimate about this. History is not just around us, it is beneath us, always waiting. Memory in the ground. Even in the cities where nothing spectacular has been found, small things emerge: a Roman coin beneath a London street, a Viking ship under a farmhouse in Norway, a child's toy from the Bronze Age sealed in clay beneath a Turkish field. These aren't relics, they are residues, traces of lives lived, of thoughts thought, of stories now silent. And they remind us, we are not the first. The cities we call home are part 2, sometimes part 3 or 4. We inherit not just land, but layers of memory. Even if we forget, the earth does not. As the pace of your breathing slows, and the glow of waking life fades behind closed eyes, consider this: perhaps the ancient empires that left no trace, did leave a trace. It's just that we are standing on it. From the depth of this realization, we prepare to return, not to monuments, but to meaning. Our final chapter reflects on why civilizations vanish. Not just how, not just where, but why the human story includes so many forgotten verses. Now we drift into the last softened reflection. Civilizations do not always die in thunder. Often, they fade like a dream upon waking, softly, slowly, without alarm. The final ruins collapse under moss. The last language is spoken to no one. The great cities are abandoned, not in war, but in forgetting. But perhaps that word is too final, too cruel. Perhaps they are not lost, but sleeping. The many causes of vanishing. We often search for a single cause when empires vanish: a war, a drought, a plague, but the truth is rarely that simple. Civilizations collapse under the weight of many quiet burdens: environmental degradation from overuse of land, shifting climates, altering rainfall and food supply, trade networks collapsing due to politics or piracy, leadership failures, and civil unrest, migrations that drain population cores, and perhaps most subtle of all, a cultural loss of faith in the idea of the civilization itself. Sometimes the center cannot hold, not because of force, but because of fatigue. Other times, they don't vanish at all, they transform. People remain, bloodlines continue, but the rituals change, the cities crumble, the gods fall silent. What was once a civilization becomes a memory, and then a myth. This is not destruction, it is erosion. What we lose when a civilization disappears, we do not only lose architecture, we lose ideas, languages with concepts we can no longer translate, medicines whose ingredients are now extinct, philosophies that approached life from angles we never imagined, calendars that marked time differently, art that saw the soul in shape, in shadow, in silence. We lose world views, and with them, possibility. Perhaps some lost cultures had no prisons. Perhaps some had gods who whispered, not ruled. Perhaps some saw death, not as an end, but as a festival of return. We'll never know, and that not knowing, that aching absence of detail, is what gives these lost civilizations their haunting power. They become mirrors, reflecting not what they were, but what we hope, or fear, or long to believe. Why we forget history is often written by the literate, the powerful, the victors, and the rest. The rest are omitted, conquered peoples, dissolved cultures, those without alphabets, without empires, without iron or marble. They vanish not because they mattered less, but because they left no voice behind loud enough to survive the noise of time. And even when traces remain, glyphs, ruins, roads, the meaning is often gone. A book in a language no one speaks, a song without a melody, a city without a name. We remember what is useful, we forget what is quiet, what we can still hear. But maybe the silence is not complete. Maybe some civilizations are not entirely gone, but sleeping in our bones. Their customs, long diluted, may still live in our hands when we gather in the curve of a tool, the rhythm of a lullaby, the tilt of a roof, the hush we feel under a full moon. They may not need to be remembered fully, to be carried forward. The comfort of mystery, as your body rests deeper into night, let the thoughts settle gently. Some mysteries were never meant to be solved. Some civilizations were meant to come and go like tides, like breath. Their impermanence is not a failure, but a kind of poetry, and we too are part of this rhythm. No civilization lasts forever, but perhaps that is not a tragedy. Perhaps it is the way memory teaches humility, that nothing built in stone lasts longer than what is carved into curiosity. So tonight, we do not mourn the lost, we listen, and in listening, we become part of their story. The ancient empires that left no trace may leave something softer, something more enduring, a whisper as the world sleeps. Good night.